Hello everybody, what's going on? This is Andrew, and today I am back to talk about Explorer some more. I'm gonna show off 5 more decks that you can transfer from Pioneer to Explorer and how I would do that transfer. I'm excited about Explorer. I wasn't even gonna make a video today. I was gonna take today off and just wait until the release of New Capenna and Explorer's official launch on Thursday. But I was looking at some of the MTGO results, and there were some decks there that I definitely wanted to address and talk about. So I'm going to talk about at least 5 more decks for Explorer that you can just take from Pioneer and put into Explorer. Explorer is a really wide open format though, and so even though I talked about 10 decks the other day, and I'm going to talk about 5 or 6 more today, that's not all that you can play. This format's going to be wide open at the beginning, and New Capenna is going to add some power and some new formats probably. So just because I'm talking about some of these decks, that doesn't mean that these decks are the only things I think you should be playing. I'm just trying to highlight a wide variety of decks to give you an idea of what's out there. So that being said, let's just jump straight into this first deck, the Jund Cat Sacrifice deck. The Rakdos Sacrifice deck that I highlighted the other day didn't include the infamous Cat Oven combo. So if you don't know, Cauldron Familiar and Witch's Oven makes a really stupid combo. Whenever the cat comes into play, you gain a life and your opponent loses a life. You can sacrifice a food to bring it back from the graveyard. Witch's Oven says you can sacrifice a creature to make a food. Okay, so you can sacrifice the cat, put it in the graveyard, and then cat eats the food and comes back into play. It gets even more annoying if you have a Mayhem Devil sitting on the battlefield, which says whenever a player sacrifices a permanent and deals damage to anything. A deck very, very similar to this was extremely popular and really oppressive in Standard a few years ago, and you can play a very similar build in Historic, or in Explorer, sorry. I don't know that this deck is like winning any tournaments or being the best deck ever, but if you are the kind of person who likes to generate a lot of triggers, and if you want to play with these cards, this deck is here for you. I will probably not play with these cards, at least at first. There are other decks that I find more interesting that I'll get to later, but I wanted to call this out. A friend pointed out that I had forgotten to highlight Cat Oven in the other deck, so I wanted to show off a Cat Oven deck because this combo is here in the format, and this deck is really efficient and really grindy. And so if this is your cup of tea, you can go crazy. You don't need to change anything from this list that I found in Pioneer to Explorer. Spirits decks used to be like the go-to aggro tempo deck of the Pioneer format. When Pioneer started, everybody wanted to play Spirits. These days, there are so many other decks, and I feel like Spirits is just one of many like tier 1.5 options you can play. But it's probably the deck that best utilizes Collected Company in the format. So we do have Collected Company on release day in Explorer. So one of the things you could do is add Collected Company to a bunch of Spirits and go crazy. Unfortunately, the Spirits deck is missing quite a few cards. So just for reference, a deck similar to this got 2nd place in one of the challenges on Magic Online this weekend. But we're missing Mausoleum Wanderer, we're missing Selfless Spirit, and most importantly, we're missing Spell Queller. So, like I said, we still do have Collected Company, and we can kind of fill in some of those pieces, right? You can replace Mausoleum Wanderer with Spectral Sailor. They don't do the exact same thing, but Spectral Sailor is another good 1-drop that you can play in the slot. Losing Selfless Spirit does kind of suck, but Remorseful Cleric is a 2-mana 2/1 flyer that has a relevant ability, and if you fill in with a couple Selfless Saviors, I think that you get a similar feel, similar play to the deck. You might not even need the Selfless Savior though, because I want to play Linvala in this deck. Linvala, Shield of the Seagate, is never going to activate the party part of it, but the other part, where she's a 3-mana 3/3 flyer that can sacrifice to give all of your stuff hexproof or indestructible, I think that's really powerful. And being able to hit that off of Collected Company is something that you want access to in a deck like this. So again, I don't like, she doesn't fit into the, you know, the flying or the spirits part of this deck, but she is a flyer. She is a good hit off Collected Company, and she can protect the rest of your board as you go wider and wider. The mana base you can take exactly 1-for-1 from the lists online, other than Mana Confluence. Some versions play a couple Mana Confluences. The World Tree here is a placeholder for the Bant Triome Spara's Headquarters that comes out in a few days. I would play a couple of those and just try the deck just like this. In the sideboard, you're not missing any pieces either. So if you're okay trying this deck without Mausoleum Wanderer, Spell Queller, and Selfless Spirit, I think this is about what I'd do. Like I said, I think that Linvala kind of taking the place of the Selfless Spirit is kind of cute. You're missing Spell Queller, and you don't really have a way to replicate Spell Queller, but you still have aggressive flyers and a decent tempo plan, and maybe that's good enough. And if you're in the market for a Spirits deck, but you don't want to play Collected Company and you don't like white cards, this is a mono blue Spirits deck. The previous deck played some more powerful Spirits and aimed to overwhelm opponents with a massive board of quality creatures. Builds like this aim to get under opponents, and with usually just barely enough resources to get over the finish line. This deck plays cheap, efficient creatures and then backs them up with Curious Obsession, which gives a creature +1/+1, and whenever it hits an opponent, you draw a card. So you slap this on an early flyer, you protect your early flyer with counter magic like Spell Pierce, Geistlight Snare, Lofty Denial, and you just start drawing a bunch of cards and playing to the board. Pascal Maynard top 16 one of the challenges over the weekend with the build of this deck, and then another player got the 15th place in the other challenge from the weekend. So this deck is putting up, you know, decent results, okay results. Again, this deck is missing a card. It's missing Mausoleum Wanderer. So you don't have that piece. Instead, I think the best option is Lantern Bearer. This card's not great, but I think it, you know, it's a cheap spirit. It does all the spirit things you want it to do, and it does have value if the game goes late. But yeah, I think that this deck can be totally fine if you make that swap for Mausoleum Wanderer. The rest of the deck is still here. You still have, you know, your Lord and Supreme Phantom. You've got your Shacklegeist and your Rattle Chains for protection also. And then you've got Brazen Borrower and Faceless Haven. The deck has some stuff going for it, and I think that this deck could be totally fine to play as is. And I actually love mono blue decks. So as I was putting that other deck together, it's got me thinking about another version of mono blue that I've played to some success when it was in standard. So I threw it together here. This is a bonus list. This is not an actual deck in Pioneer right now, but I like these cards, and these are other mono blue cards that have been competitive and have been good enough in previous formats. I don't know if they're going to be good enough here. My guess is that they're not going to be good enough here, but same idea, right? You've got a bunch of cheap creatures that have good abilities. You've got protection spells for your Curious Obsession, and then you've got a couple ways to go big in Brineborn Cutthroat and Brazen Borrower. Merfolk Trickster is a great card against other creature decks. Again, I just wanted to talk about mono blue a little bit more because I like this deck a lot, and I think that there's something here. I'm going to try this deck in Explorer. I'd have no idea if it's going to be good enough to mention past that, but I think that there are other ways to build small blue aggressive decks than Spirits if you want to look into them. So here's an option. Let's get back to the actual Pioneer deck lists that are doing well. So the next two decks are for all of you big mana enthusiasts. If you like big mana decks, these are for you. Second place in one of the challenges over the weekend, the one, Bant Spirits was won second place, and then the next challenge was this one. Is this crazy Izzet Fires of Invention deck? I showed off a Fires of Invention deck at the end of my last video. it included a combo to sneak out Agent of Treachery really quick. This deck isn't doing any combo stuff, right? It's using Fires of Invention as, quote, fairly as possible, in that it's just using it to cast lots of big spells and get ahead on mana. So the cute thing here is you can go Fires and then play Chandra in the same turn, and then the following turn you can Golos to go get a land, so now you can cast your 6s with Fires pretty easily. This deck gets access to a bunch of cool utility lands. It plays a bunch of cheap red removal to make sure that you get to the point where you're casting Fires of Invention and Golos and stuff like that. Golos is really important to this deck. It can fetch your Cascading Cataracts or your World Tree, which means you can then cast your Kami War and your Farewells without Fires of Invention if you need to. Or you can just use Fires to cast these off-color cards. They're powerful cards that can probably just win you the game if cast in the right way. But yeah, this is a big control deck, right? It's going way over the top with Yorion, Fires, and Golos. And the entirety of this deck is playable in Explorer if you swap the Darksteel Citadel for a Treasure Vault. Now, I don't know how good that is, but that's the only swap that you really need to make this deck work. Everything else you can just copy over from the list from Magic Online. I think big mana decks like this are sweet. They don't always work out, but when they do, it's awesome. And if you like where this is going, I think you'll like the next deck too. So 4th place in that same challenge, the previous deck got 2nd in, was a deck that looks kind of like this, another Yorion Golos deck. But this one doesn't have any blue. It's a mono-white, big mid-range deck that uses cheap, efficient creatures like Portable Hole and Thraben Inspector to stay in the game until you can cast your powerful cards like Karn, Golos, Wandering Emperor, Cast Out, things like that. This deck features the infamous Book of Exalted Deeds combo. So this says if you gain 3 or more life, make an angel. That part's not really the part that you care about. The other part, which says exile it, put a counter on an angel, it gains you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. Well, if only there was an angel that was kind of hard to kill. Faceless Haven, Mutavault in the Pioneer version of the deck, but Explorer, we have to go with Faceless Haven, is an angel, because it's all the things. So you can activate Faceless Haven, activate Book, put a counter on the Haven, and now you can't lose the game as long as Faceless Haven doesn't die. And as long as you don't turn it into a creature, it's harder for your opponents to kill. And yeah. So this deck plays like a mid-rangey control deck, and then also just includes this combo, which Karn can fetch because there's a Book of Exalted Deeds in the sideboard. And then it just tries to go big. To transfer this deck from Pioneer to Explorer, you do need to make some card pool concessions. We don't have Knight of the White Orchid, so we have to play Loyal Warhound instead. They do very, very similar things, but the Warhound is probably a little worse, but I think it can fill in a pinch. We also don't have Thalia's Lancers, which is a 5-mana 4/4 first striker that goes and gets a legendary creature. Instead, I put 2 copies of Search for Glory in this deck. This searches for a snow card, a legendary, or a saga. There's a lot of legendaries in this deck that you want to be able to go and get. I don't know that you need Search for Glory, but I figured the original deck had 2 copies of an effect like this, so I thought I'd start with 2 of these and see if that does what we want it to do. And this does fetch Planeswalkers, right? So you can play this and then go get a Planeswalker, and then cast the Planeswalker, which is neat. And then the original build had Stasis Snare, which is a 3-mana flash enchantment that does kind of what Cast Out does. I think playing Cast Out instead is just fine. You can cycle it early on if you need. It's flexible. It's more expensive, but it's flexible. It's fine. And then I have an Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger here. The original deck had Emrakul, the Promised End. Emrakul is definitely easier to cast, but we're going to be going big. We're going to have lots of mana. Having access to a big Ulamog later on is probably fine. Like I said, we are playing Faceless Haven, so we need the Snowlands. And then this deck, along with the mono green deck I highlighted in the last video, plays Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx. We don't have Nykthos here. I think it's definitely a loss for a deck like this. You know, you want to be able to make your big mana as soon as possible, but since nobody's doing that, nobody's going that big, I don't know that it would actually matter. Like, I think you could play this deck as is in the format for now, and it'll be fine. You'll be slower than the Pioneer version of the deck, for sure. But I don't know if you're going to be slow enough that that concession matters for now. It might, but I would try it out just as is. Replace the Nykthoses with like Field of Ruins or other utility lands, and give it a shot. It might just play out just fine. But yeah, if you're a fan of mid-rangey white decks that go big with Golos and Karn, I think you should try this deck out. Like I said, it got 4th in one of the challenges over the weekend. It kind of is attacking from an angle people weren't expecting, and it transfers over reasonably well to this format. And there we go. 5 more decks transferred over from Pioneer to Explorer, and a bonus mono blue deck there in the middle. I'm excited for the format to drop. I'm going to be playing a decent amount of it once it comes out, and I hope it's good. I hope it's fun, and I hope that there are good events that kind of force us to invest time into learning the format on Arena. That is going to be it for me for today. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you next time.